Good spring morning to you.
Good morning.
I know it's gray, but daffodils are everywhere. It's good to be together on this morning when the world is taking shape. And it's good to be together in a community where we look at the big questions of life. The questions that we mull on sometimes in the middle of the night. The questions that we come back to over and over again, trying to make meaning of them, trying to make meaning of our own lives. And we work to have this be a place where we can talk about the big questions, where we can take on the things that are difficult and unsettling, and remember that we'll always come back to being kind to each other and finding meaning and kindness together. Welcome to this community where we keep seeking and growing our kindness. Alex and Nick will light our chalice this morning, and I invite you to speak the words of our covenant, which you will find printed in the order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament. The service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to respect the nurturing power within all of us, thus to recover. I invite you to join in singing our opening hymn, and this is where we begin to encounter the reality that this was a busy week and Yvonne was out of the office spring break. And so this is the first spot of the couple where the order of service what we do won't exactly match the order of service. So instead of singing 134, we're going to sing 139. Close. Wonders still the world should witness. This morning we get to honor one of the people in our congregation who is planting seeds all the time, who is always working in the present to help things grow and flourish in the future. Some of the flourishing happens right now in the present as well, as you will recognize when we hear about this person. We are giving the Paul Beswick UU of the Year Award today. And this is an award that we give annually to celebrate someone who works in this congregation to make sure that it continues to flourish. Paul Beswick was a member of this congregation for many years, and he did a lot to support our congregation when he was here. But he never wanted to be recognized publicly for what he did behind the scenes. And he died a few years ago, and after his death, we got to recognize what he had done here, and we got to express our gratitude. And so we have started to give an award in his name for people who are always working in our congregation and maybe haven't been celebrated yet for all they do to tend our congregation. So let me just describe some of the qualities of Paul that we put on this award, that we keep our eye out for people supporting this congregation. Someone who supports with their time and their funds what they think is important in the world, particularly F.U.U.S.E. We look for someone who commits to things they love. We look for someone who has a little bit of playfulness or mischief. We look for someone who's an innovator, interested in trying new things. These were qualities that Paul had, and qualities that build a church, build a community, build a life. The Program Council receives nominations for this award, and they always have a long and difficult conversation about choosing who to celebrate this time and how to express our gratitude. So Gwen Kenny will come forward and share who we're celebrating and thanking this year.
Hello. Good morning. Gwen, Chair of the Program Council, and I am delighted to be here today presenting the Paul Beswick Award. The person I'm going to introduce to you is someone who does so much for all of us here at F.U.U.S. with a steady presence and a smile on her face. She has had many roles here at F.U.U.S. She's currently on the Board of Trustees, the Connections Committee, the Stewardship Committee, and past chair of the Program Council. She's also on the Aesthetics Committee, helping us to beautify and organize our spaces here at F.U.U.S. She's working right now with a team to create and build acoustic panels for the parish hall. One of her team members on this project said she seems to enjoy riding around with large boxes of sound insulation and rolls of fabric in her car, in addition to wielding a mean staple gun. So I have seen her at the top of a high ladder in the entrance hall, happily and skillfully painting those hard-to-reach corners. She's brave and undaunted. She also is an avid knitter, a member of the knitting ministry, creating many shawls to give to F.U.U.S. folks in need of a little comfort. She cooks for our Seacoast Family Promise host nights and the caring committee, and willingly adds her delicious gluten-free baked goods to the table for gatherings here of all kinds. She's a great organizer in a gentle way. She works well with everyone and is kind and thoughtful in her approach. She can be counted on to get things done while seeming to enjoy whatever the task is. She's interesting, curious, and a delight to talk to. Ask her sometime about her travels and her biking adventures. Most of all, she's a role model for all of us here, with her warmth, her welcoming manner, and her boundless energy and creativity. We are so very grateful to have her here with us. On behalf of all of us here at F.U.U.S., it's my pleasure to present this award to Karen Patino.
It's wonderful to take moments to be grateful for each other and to celebrate what we do together. Today, we're going to talk about two threads of the work in the world. One is some of the things that are going on in our district and in Unitarian Universalism as a whole, and then how that connects to some of the work on, some of the anti-racism work that's happening in the world at large. And that's always how it goes. What's happening in Unitarian Universalism, what's happening in the world, meet here in this sanctuary, in these halls, in our lives. You might remember me talking a year ago about the Unitarian Universalist Board committing to raise funds for the newly formed organization, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. And just about a year ago, the Northern New England District of the Unitarian Universalist Association decided to make a gift from its endowment to Black Lives of UU. We gave $100,000 from that endowment to this forming organization. And there was great enthusiasm among the delegates at that meeting to support people of color in Unitarian Universalism. The organization Black Lives UU supports people of color in this religion. And part of the reason they got started most recently is that they realized that people of color were not being hired for positions in the UUA and for ministry positions, that it looked like things were still not equitable in our tradition. And so they are calling for Unitarian Universalism to take a good look at ourselves and see how we can truly live up to what we say we believe in. So the organization, Black Lives UU, supports people of color in Unitarian Universalism. And it also helps find ways to make sure that their voices and their stories and their identities are more present in our tradition. That we are mindful of paying attention to all of the stories. And our district board, which I am a member of, I joined, I think it's 2 years ago. I'm looking to Jane for confirmation on linear time. And I talked about it 2 years ago, and then I haven't talked to you very much about the work that we're doing. The district board was aware that having given that gift of money to support Black Lives UU, we then needed to really be sure that we followed up with the reflection and engagement so that we were really making sure we lived into what we say we believe in. So earlier this month, we organized a workshop that was held at the UU Church in Nashua to help us work on dismantling white supremacy and building liberation as Unitarian Universalists. It's hard to absorb that title. I'm giving us a breath for absorbing. We had 2 facilitators come who clearly work together often. They work with Black Lives UU, and they travel around the country working with groups of people, helping us figure out how to really be in the liberation work that the world around us is calling out for, and our own tradition is calling out for. They help people work on understanding the biases that we carry around with us that we're not aware of. Those are the ones that get you. They work with groups to try to both challenge them and help them feel more connected to each other. Because it is in those relationships that we can really begin to change and be more deeply ourselves. Aisha Hauser and Liz Loeb were the facilitators, and I am sure that their names will come through our stories many more times over the years. They are people who have amazing presence and an ability to work with other people. That is just seeing people work really well with each other is liberation work itself. I think that's one of the reasons we recognized Karen this morning. She has that capacity to work with people, and that kind of connectedness is world-changing. We often underestimate how powerful that is. So we think that it is important spiritual work to work on ending the culture of white supremacy, which is to say the culture that says that the way that New England Protestant middle-class people is that that's the sort of normal culture. So dismantling that is liberation work, and it's important spiritual work for Unitarian Universalists. Because in order to be a deeply spiritual being, you have to actually be living in your values. You can't be next to them, then you're not whole. We also need to know our full story. full story of our country, our ancestors, our religion, the good and the bad together, because you have to have it whole if you're going to be a spiritually grounded and present person. Being spiritual means living into the connection of life, all of the ways that we're connected. And so you have to know all of the stories to be in those connections. And I think that's why it's important work, even though it is hard work. 3 members of this congregation attended that workshop that happened in Nashua. And so we will get to hear from each of them this morning. And it's wonderful to get to hear different perspectives and different understandings of this work that we're in now. First, we get to hear from Pay Yosha, and then a little bit later in the service, we'll get to hear from Sylvia Foster and David Weber.
I decided to participate in the Dismantling White Supremacy UU conference in Nashua because the title had forceful, compelling language. Dismantling says to me ending, and white supremacy is a label with which I have become uncomfortable, maybe even defensive about. I have always tried to use the phrase recognizing white privilege instead. My goal for that day was understanding what it means to be a majority white person whose anti-racist intentions have not always been borne out. Why do I run away from white supremacy as a descriptor, for example? I do not believe that I have power over someone else. I hold no political position, no authority. My nearly pure white skin is not something I rely on to gain attention, position, or rule. Or do I? White privilege sounds softer, but it connotes, I think, something earned. Is that an honest assessment of how I derived my social status? A black New Hampshire UU leader at the conference describes white supremacy this way. The designation of the black race to a position of inferiority in white people's thinking has resulted in a system that sends melanin-enhanced, that is black and brown skinned people, to the bottom of society and the economy, while putting in a top position those who are melanin deficient, white. We are melanin deficient, without that dark skin or hair pigmentation. Who would have thought white people were deficient in anything? The man's sophisticated description is an accurate but different use of language, coming from a different perspective. Unconsciously, I have power, privilege, authority. It may be demonstrated covertly, felt by others who do not have it. Here is the news story for me. Although I live in a nearly all-white state, and a town which is multicultural, multiracial, primarily because of an elite boarding school, I usually take for granted that there's no real reason to ask the question, how do I benefit from white cultural supremacy? What have I done to earn my white privilege? I do not methodically say, what is the impact of white cultural supremacy on people of color? But I do not have to look far to witness that impact. You probably saw the headline in Friday's Exeter newsletter. Phillips Exeter walkout screams for black victims. They were calling for attention to the disproportionality of black victims of gun violence in this country. And I do not have to look far to see and hear that the culture is shifting. Pulitzer Prize in music to a rap group's recording called Damn by Kendrick Lamar. I cannot understand many of the lyrics, but the vitality of the rhythms and the words will soon be in the airwaves all around us. Some of them are clearly the sounds of resistance, eons away from the Beatles, for example. The poet laureate of the U.S. right now is a black woman, Tracy K. Smith. Artists and activist teenagers may be, for some of us, the models for dismantling white supremacy. I have much work ahead of me to say honestly, this is what I can change in my life that would positively impact the lives of indigenous, ethnic, or cultural minorities. 3 guidelines for me in changing my thinking and action are these. First, clarity. I'm repeatedly astounded to learn what I do not know about the history of racism, of genocide of indigenous people, of sexism in education, or about slavery and discrimination here in New Hampshire, even here in Exeter. I will continue to visit the Black Heritage Trail events and sites and knowledgeable experts there. I will help to expand the work of Exeter's Racial Unity Team. I will urge curriculum changes in our public schools so that the history of racism is not omitted. My second guideline, humanity. I live in a congregation that is more culturally and ethnically diverse than I understand deeply, but which is primarily quite homogeneous, racially quite homogeneous. The world, just 50 miles away, does not look like us. The rest of the world will soon make us a minority town, for the populations are changing. If white supremacy still reigns in 50 years, it will be based on political and economic power, not the dominant color of the people. Humanity, though, will be, I hope, my guiding principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Easier said than done? I will continue my outreach and expand my friendships with people of color. I will be supportive of them when they describe for me nearly daily racist insults or snubs. And this is my third guideline, resolve. This is the major challenge. The sacred work is to collectively wrestle with what it means to work collaboratively in this majority white community whose anti-racist intentions are not always carried out. I will demonstrate more with Black Lives Matter folks in Portsmouth. I'll read authors of color in my Exeter book group. I'll listen to every lecture by We the People where racial equality is so often the underlying theme. I'll work for the election of egalitarian candidates. I will sometimes feel defensive, even fragile, perhaps angry at times, as I encounter challenges to my thinking, my actions, my words, new relationships, new knowledge, new activities, arenas for understanding our own biases and biases that shape our institutions, including our church. The alternative to confronting my white privilege, white supremacy, silence, indifference. Personally, that is unacceptable. I think it is for you too.
In all the work in the world and all that is happening around us, we make a space in this community to honor what is happening in the most intimate corners of our lives. To know that what is unfolding in your life and your heart is also essential to the world. That your well-being and that you feeling like you belong, feeling like you are listened to, is essential to the world going well. So we make this time for joys and sorrows. Some joys and sorrows will be put into words and we will get to hear them, and many of them will not be. And we honor what is here in the room, in your hearts, whether it's put into words or not. And if you are ready to put into words a joy or a sorrow, a moment of change in your life, come and stand with me here by the piano so that you can hear what is unfolding in your world.
I have, as is so often the case, both a joy and a sorrow. I spent 3 days this week in Buffalo, New York, which a lot of people would consider to be a sorrow. My reason for going there was the funeral of a friend whose name was Ken Colmore, and I wanted to make sure that I said his name. Ken and I, about 30 years ago, started our career in human services as emergency mental health outreach workers, which was probably the most profound minimum wage job I ever had in my life. Our job was to go out into the community and work with people, whether they were suicidal or on bridges or holding hostages, whatever. That was our job. Ken and I were contemporaries, we retired together, and from Ken I learned a lot. I learned about compassion, I learned about love, I learned about ferocity, I learned about respect, and I hadn't spent a lot of time with Ken over the last few years, but I do remember he was a great organizer. It was very intense work, and when we weren't hanging out at the bar afterward, we were often going camping at amazing places, and Ken would typically sit on the beach and look at the lake and watch the loons and turn to me and say, I wonder what the rich people are doing today. And a friend of mine in UU said, I know what the rich people are doing today. They're here remembering Ken and thinking about him. So I appreciate the chance to sort of share that.
Good morning. My name is Rob, and I wasn't even sure I was going to make it in today, but I'm really glad to be here, and I'm going to do my best impression I can of my father. I'm trying to be as brief as I can, which will be impossible if I'm accurate with my father. His name was Tudor Richards, and I only bring him up because of the subject, and I was recalling how he said to me growing up, you know, you are the fifth great-grandson of Thomas Jefferson, and that's something to be proud of. You're his great-great-great-great-grandfather, and which makes me the fourth. And well, your grandfather, he's the third great-grandson. And we went down to Monticello when I was 16 or so, and we had the family tour and got to see everything backstage, so to speak. And what occurred to me as as the years passed, looking back, there was no mention of Sally Hemings in that event. There was not one member there, not one word of anyone of color at that event. My father never mentioned that history, if he was even aware, which I found deeply troubling. And it's interesting, because my mother and my father used to have these battles, because he was Republican for many years. My mother was a staunch liberal Democrat. So there were fireworks at home sometimes. Bryan Stevenson is a great name, and he's provided a lot for me. And he spoke to how when you're within those close proximities with somebody, you're right there, and you can say, I see you. And to really be in that closeness is how those bridges are made, and how those stories can be shared, and how you can cope with all that patriarchal shame, if you will, some of that shame, and wrestle with that, which I do, indeed I do.
Hi, my name is Heather, and I have a joy and a sorrow. My daughter turned 16 on Tuesday. My joy is that she's in the back pew, probably trying to crawl underneath because she's embarrassed because I'm not up here talking about it. But I'm just amazed at the, my joy is that I'm amazed at the young woman that she's turning into. Beautiful on the inside and out, and a very caring person, and I'm so proud of her. And the sorrow is the realization that she's probably not going to be in her home in the near future. She's going to be going out on her own and starting her own life. So that's a tough one to swallow.
am Kristen O'Gorman. I just wanted to share, I just wanted to share my mother-in-law got on a boat when she was a teenage girl for a new world, and came here from Ireland and we welcomed him to Ellis Island. And I'm just always thinking of the people that are getting on boats today that are not so welcomed into our country. But today is my mother-in-law's birthday. Her name is, as a girl when she arrived in America, it was Annie Teresa Rourke, and Teresa O'Gorman.
We can hear that the joys and sorrows are not only unfolding in this moment here, but actually unfolding across generations all the time. There are many people who are not in this room who are part of the meaning that we are making. We are going to sneak our young people out to the parish hall, and they are going to have a short conversation during this next little bit of our service, so that they can ask some questions and have a little back and forth. This is the last Sunday that we're doing our experiment with having our children here for worship time. And so we're just taking this little moment for some conversation, and then they'll be back to join us. So I'll invite the young people who would like to be able to leave with Lindsay Jean to join her over here by the door. And if anyone wants to stay, we'd love to have everyone here. And while they're sneaking out, we'll prepare ourselves to then resettle in this space, in this moment with each other. To be still and grounded, to breathe, to notice that you are surrounded by people who want the best for the world, want the best for you. And I invite you to settle into that loving kindness meditation that we use so often. When we talk about ending racism, when we talk about white culture, when we talk about these things, it's easy to lose your loving kindness. It's easy to get unsettled and uncertain and feeling bad. And it's good to keep your center, your breath, your loving kindness. This time might be just a time for you, but anyone who you need to hold in loving kindness, you need to remember their goodness and the fact that all people are deeply worthy of love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. Breathe out, I breathe out love. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I breathe out love. David Weber and Sylvia Foster will share their reflections and their thinking and their perspective on this project we're all on. And I am going to go and talk with our young people for a few minutes in the parish hall. So we're going to have two kinds of conversations going on at the same time, which will hopefully magically come together in coffee hour for all kinds of wonderful conversations. So I look forward to stepping back into this conversation in a few minutes.
Good morning. I went to the UU workshop in Nashua with some private reservations. I resisted the term white supremacy, which I associated with the centuries of slavery and the decades of white exclusion, terror, and lethal violence known as Jim Crow. I thought that in 2018, to invoke it was to revel in a guilt that the UUA might have embraced, but that I wasn't ready to own. I had read quite a bit and had listened to many compelling black voices, and I knew that we don't live in a post-racial society, but was white supremacy really ours to dismantle? One of the first themes of the UU workshop anticipated my skepticism. If you feel yourself getting defensive, the leaders said, try not to double down, try to stay curious. Okay, I thought, the world is big enough and complicated enough that curiosity ought to be the constant state of mind of any sentient being. I had already started to connect some dots, but there were more dots than there are stars in the night sky over northern Maine or Yosemite National Park. Unitarians have stellar humane values, but we have our own issues. For one thing, we're suspected of a tendency to overthink things. I may be illustrating that in real time. Yet we also do try to live simply and be of service. Some of that service addresses real needs within the congregation. Some of it addresses real needs in the local community. Some addresses planetary needs that are also local through 350.org or the Blue Ocean Society. But I wonder how much of our service has anything to do with our national racial history. Bryan Stevenson, whom Rob mentioned a few minutes ago, is a civil rights lawyer whose famous TED Talk will tell you more in 20 minutes than you thought 20 minutes could carry. On Thursday, in a hilltop in Montgomery, Alabama, he succeeded in opening a new national memorial and museum that confronts the history of lynching, confronts it there. Its name is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Stevenson could have called it the National Memorial to White Racial Hatred and Violence, to White Supremacy, in which case it would have made more defensiveness more likely, made curiosity harder to sustain. But for Stevenson, this isn't just about a rhetorical choice, a tactic. Like Martin Luther King, he believes in the beloved community. Here are my takeaways. White supremacy as an overtly racist obsession enforced by terror and violence is not exactly the same thing as white supremacy culture, which often operates unconsciously, which allows us not to know that it is there, and to feel aggrieved or worse if someone points to its effects in the North in 2018. Its effects not in enslavement or lynching, but in housing discrimination, in racially skewed law enforcement, in oblivious hiring, even apparently oblivious hiring in the UUA. Beyond all that, this widely held set of unconscious assumptions and attitudes sustains a psychological environment in which people of color, especially but not exclusively African Americans, cannot feel safe while driving, or trying to buy a home, or trying to access quality education, or shopping, or, I'm afraid, interacting with white people. In a recent interview, Bryan Stevenson said, "We're all burdened by our history of racial inequality. It's created a kind of smog that we all breathe in, and it has prevented us from being healthy. I'm still not in love with the phrase dismantling white supremacy unless it comes with contextual attachments, but I am on board for the project of racial equality, not just in the psyche of white people, but in the lived experience of everyone else. There are ways for us to help with that. The Social Justice Committee welcomes additional members, but also just plain questions. Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk is on YouTube. So is novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's On the Danger of a Single Story. May curiosity prevail and lead to change.
Morning. Good morning. So just before I went to the UU gathering in Nashua, I heard writer Angie Thomas speak. Thomas, who is black, said to us, "I don't need allies, I need co-conspirators." White people, she said, realize your privilege as the truth. Use your privilege for the benefit of others, and in the process, don't call attention to yourselves. She illustrated her point by having us think back to when Bree Newsom climbed the flagpole to take the Confederate flag down. There was a man standing in the crowd nearby, and he heard two police officers say, "We're gonna tase this pole." So the white man stepped up to the pole, hugged it, and turned his head to the officers and said, "You tase her, you tase me too." He didn't make the act about himself. He just got the supporting job done. So as I listened to the UUA speakers in Nashua, I thought about how my work at UNH has changed. My office, whose assignment is to create a learning environment where all may participate and thrive, has kind of a new way of operating. I've noticed because following our recent presidential election, people around us have been waking up from being politically drowsy. They're seeing the racism in individuals and in systems. Now, it's been said that academics like shiny objects. I'm one, and I can see that. We like to deal with things like learning outcomes and cultural competencies, hoping that will be the fix for society's unrest. These days, however, we're leading at UNH and shifting the emphasis to looking at ourselves, to feeling empathy, and recognizing the lack of it toward our students of color as they struggle to pay for books that weren't on the list of things when they took the loans out, or they're discovering they're underprepared, and we all know that there are many high schools that are underfunded. Today in our listening sessions at UNH and campus-wide workshops, we're asking people to practice humility. The humility that comes with not judging other people. And we call for respecting people's heritage and the experiences that don't match our own. So now we get it. Personal work is the principal tool in interrupting bias and hate. One way we're putting the soul-searching personal work in place is in dialoguing with students about Mexico's holiday, Cinco de Mayo. It's not a day for white people to dress in ponchos and paste on fake mustaches and drink. The fraternities are supporting this turnaround by hanging banners from their second-story windows saying, "This is not our holiday." Downtown businesses have been asked by our administration to stop handing out the free gifts of sombreros and maracas. And on campus, we're offering a lot of programs to help white students understand why they need to stop using other people's cultural traditions as if they belong to them, and making it another reason to party or dress up, such as on Halloween, in ways that insult a person or an entire culture.
So as an alternative to Cinco de Mayo, this week students at UNH are being invited to participate in Days of Unity and Service. And it will be a community event, and there'll be a picnic to join in at the end. So we've all suggested that the foundation for this work comes from white people doing more work. And in this case, more inner work, finding ways that we all win, ways that we're in this together. So here's one of my personal challenges, and again, perhaps it's others too. I meet someone who's not similar to me. I see the outer person first, and I start assuming. Yep. And then I can choose to be curious and seek the truth, as our UU principles require us to do. What can I know about this person who's new to me? What is there about them that I can't see at first sight? Perhaps they look black to me, but once we start talking, they tell me they're of mixed heritage. And perhaps they'll tell me that they identify as gay. I'll be reminded of how no one lives a single identity life, because no one is of a single identity. And I don't always need to be right when I'm engaging with someone new. If I make an error when I'm in this work, I just apologize. As Rob says, keep trying to build bridges. I like the advice we received at the UU gathering to keep asking the people who are not white, what's it like to be living in this town? Or going to school here, or trying to find work, or a place to live in the seacoast or surrounds. Then we need to listen and discover for ourselves what it's like to be someone who isn't just like us here in this town. Listening plays the key role in being a co-conspirator. Listening to the person who has been marginalized means listening without judging. Then we can go to work. Here's something that really got to me that writer Angie Thomas said. A lot of people are more afraid of being called racist than they are afraid of being a racist. Wow. So the speakers at our UU district meeting reminded us white people need to be ready to take our knocks. And do remember that conflict is not abuse. We need to recognize that fighting racism isn't about you as a white person. It's not about your feelings. It's about liberating people of color from a world that tries to crush them at every turn. So, if we don't know the reality of other people's lives, it means that we don't know the waters we're swimming in. We can't be co-conspirators until we know the story whole. Not to feel guilty, but rather not to be oblivious. If we live in a made-up world, one that has erased what happened in the past, we're living in a false story. So we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, because discomfort brings us the gems of insight we all need. As James Baldwin said in the 60s, we just need to see the truth that's been here all along. To that end, he said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until we face it. I know that my next steps will be to keep looking at myself and thinking about my skills and deciding what I have to give next to this work. I like to help contribute to funding political candidates. Pat mentioned, people of color whose values I share, especially for the women running, since they have had so little voice in their own lives. Many of them know that we need to bring pressure to the spaces that hold white supremacy, patriarchy, and the violence embedded in extreme wealth. My closing thoughts remind us that just because we can't see racism around us doesn't mean it isn't happening. Trust people of color's assessment, it's real. It happens around you every day. One of my colleagues who is black works in the dorms, and she oversees students and is responsible 24/7 to give them the best UNH experience possible. One morning she started out for breakfast and turned to see that someone had drawn a noose on the outside of the door, in the living space she calls home. Of course, her first impulse was to leave UNH, but she stayed. And we are so fortunate to have her brilliant, good-hearted work continuing on our campus. White supremacy, our speakers at the UU district meeting told us, had every potential to kill us spiritually and beyond. We need to get rid of it. So be a co-conspirator. We need you in this world. I follow Lilla Watson, an Aboriginal activist in Australia. She tells us how to be a co-conspirator when she says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together."
We make an offering each week to that which is larger than ourselves. That working together project that is here and way beyond our lives. On this day, we've gotten to hear some stories from leaders of our congregation. And we take up an offering for that wisdom that they have gathered and grown over the course of their lives. And I want you to know that there is another moment of storytelling. Well, you know there's another moment of storytelling coming up next weekend. We have, for the second year, a storytelling and raffle event happening here. And if you came to that event last year, you got to hear some amazing stories. And it's in that storytelling that we get connected to each other and grow our wisdom. So I hope that you will hope you'll come to that storytelling event next weekend. And that you'll participate in the basket raffle project that's waiting for you out in the community room. This is the day to participate in that. And to keep your ears out for those stories. When I was with the children in the back, we took a moment and we all did this so that we could hear better. Hear each other and hear the stories that are being told. There are candles available up front if you wish to light one silently for a memory, a hope, a moment of transformation and change in your own life. The morning offering for all of the stories of this congregation will now be received.
She's so
Lives of UU have asked Unitarian Universalism and all of our congregations to participate in a program called The Promise and the Practice. The promise is the promise of our tradition, of our religion, that we have ideals and we have done a lot of things in the world to say what we hope for relationships between white people and people of color, how we work things out together. And they say they've asked us to look pretty hard at our practice about how things are actually working out. To be thoughtful and reflective and to know that the work belongs to every one of us because we belong to each other, every one of us. And so we'll just keep participating in that conversation, in that work in the world, in that reflection. We'll try to keep leaning into the promise and the practice. We'll try to stay curious. We will definitely keep learning how to be co-conspirators, to make mistakes and to make amends, and make ourselves more whole, and then the world around us more whole. And keep singing while we do it. Let's sing hymn 153. Oh, I woke up this morning. And bring the light of this chalice forward so that you carry that spark, that warmth of community out with you into the world. Please join in the unison benediction. The words are printed in our service. Oh, peace, speak the truth, give thanks each day, respect the earth,